Hello and welcome to Big Picture. I am Vishal Dahiya, and today we're going to talk about the TRIPS waiver for manufacture of COVID-19 vaccine. Now, this is really, really important given the fact that the entire world is in the grips of the COVID-19 pandemic. And recently, 62 co-sponsor countries, including India, South Africa, and Indonesia, have given a revised draft proposal to the TRIPS Council of WTO seeking a patent waiver for manufacturing of various COVID-19 medical products, which includes vaccine as well. We'll try and understand what exactly is this proposal about, how will it help us as well as other nations across the globe in fighting this particular pandemic, and also why seeking a TRIPS waiver is really, really important. And to understand all these aspects in a much better way, we have with us two very distinguished guests. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Dr. Jayant Dasgupta, former ambassador at WTO, is with us. We're also joined by Ms. Leena Menghaney. She's regional head South Asia of the Access campaign of MSF. They're closely involved with this particular campaign as well. Welcome, both of you. Let me begin with you, Mr. Dasgupta, and let's start by understanding a bit more about TRIPS Council and the TRIPS waiver which we are talking about. What exactly is a TRIPS Council in WTO, and how does these waivers work? Why are we seeking or talking about this TRIPS waiver for medical products related to COVID-19?
The TRIPS agreement is one of the 20-odd agreements which came into force with effect from the 1st of January 1995 with the creation of the WTO. It deals with various protections which are given to intellectual property rights. And to name a few of the intellectual property rights, patents are the foremost amongst them. We have copyright, we have trademarks, we have geographical indications, we have industrial design, we have circuits and software, for instance. So various things can be termed as intellectual property. And the procedures to be followed and the protection to be given by national government, this is extremely important. The protection is to be given by national government, and there has to be a balance which has to be struck between the intellectual property right holder who has created the intellectual property or has got the rights to exploit it and the public at large. So the right balance has to be struck. Now, as far as patents are concerned, the Indian Patents Act 1970 deals with the way patents are given in India, the kind of pre-grant opposition, post-grant hearings, etc. And then there is this huge issue of compulsory licenses, which is also part of the Patent Act. Section 84, Section 92, etc. of the Indian Patents Act are there to provide for compulsory licenses. And in the case of the TRIPS agreement, it must be said that Article 31 also provides for compulsory licensing in the case of national emergencies, public health uses, government non-commercial use, etc. So the basic thing about the Patent Act is that the national government have to frame their Patent Act, their Copyright Act, the Trademarks Act in accordance, in conformity with the TRIPS agreement which everybody has signed. Now we carried out these amendments to our various intellectual property rights acts in the 90s. And in the case of the Patents Act, the last amendment was carried out in 2004, December. So from 1st January 2005, we are fully in conformity with the TRIPS agreement. We had a 10-year window for transition, during which we had a letterbox arrangement for patent applications to be filed, but not to be granted patents. So that period is over. Now we are on a par with the rest of the developed countries and the developing countries, and we are subject to the discipline of the TRIPS agreement.
Okay. That pretty much explains the importance of the TRIPS agreement and the overall role of the TRIPS Council there as well of the WTO. Let me also bring in Miss Menghaney here. Miss Leena Menghaney, if you to understand the entire importance of this proposal, which was mooted way back in October last year by India and South Africa to TRIPS Council of WTO, and a revised proposal which has now been submitted. How would you underscore the importance of such a proposal in this battle against COVID-19? One and two, if you could take us through the timeline, where do we stand right now? It has been almost more than say 8 months since the first proposal was made by India and South Africa.
So very quickly, what I would like to highlight is that COVID-19 is here to stay, and we need not just short-term solutions, but we need long-term solutions. And with COVID-19, we come to realize, pretty much like HIV/AIDS and other diseases, is that we will need to not only vaccinate people, but we will need to not only invest in prevention measures like vaccination and other prevention measures, but we will also need to treat people. We will need to test people. No infectious disease has been addressed without testing and treatment as well. So India has seen a huge wave, and we've seen the demand for treatment reaching heights because, many people don't want to go to hospital, don't want to be running after oxygen. Now, if you look at the proposal, what it says is this: the moment you have something that is of value to COVID-19, which means it offers a solution on treatment or vaccination or perhaps diagnostics, and even, for example, the trade secrets on the chemicals that go into making diagnostics. If you have these barriers, then you very quickly, the waiver sort of lifts those barriers and allows countries to manufacture or regionally manufacture and address the COVID-19 situation. India, of course, is crucial to the whole debate because India is such a major supplier of vaccines and medicines.
Okay. And then where do we stand? Because, as I was saying, it has been almost 8 months since the first proposal was made, and just a few days back, a revised draft has been given. It seems like a very lengthy process of going through with this waiver. So if you could take us through what all has been achieved so far, what more needs to be done, and then very importantly, significantly, there are various countries which also need to be brought on board as of now.
Absolutely. So when we made the proposal, we had just crossed the first wave. India had just crossed the first wave. And when it made this, since then, we've seen a huge second wave, right? Within that time period, what we have seen as a very positive move is the United States saying we are open to text-based negotiations. Of course, China has said that too. And what we see is now a willingness of the United States and the US trade representatives to engage on solutions like the TRIPS waiver at the WTO. And I cannot underline the significance of the US decision to come and support India and South Africa on the proposal. What we are seeing is that the European Union is still actually not supporting the waiver. And we really need to sort of highlight the need for European Union to come on board and support the waiver. There's a European Union resolution from perhaps the members of parliament that highlights that need as well. And since the proposal was made, millions of people have died in COVID. So we have to now look at very speedy negotiations. Countries in the ASEAN region, in the South Asia region, middle income countries who have supported but still not co-sponsored, we need countries to come forward and start co-sponsoring the proposal to cement the COVID-19 waiver proposal. The reason why I'm saying this is because we could do it the long way and the hard way, like HIV/AIDS. Every drug you do a patent challenge, every drug you do a compulsory license, country by country, case by case. But it took us 20 years to get a handle and control HIV/AIDS. Do we want to spend 20 years doing that for COVID-19? No. So I think the best way forward is to lift the intellectual property barriers and get countries in the ASEAN region, in the Asian region, to start supporting and becoming co-sponsors of the proposal.
Okay, okay. Mr. Dasgupta, your views there on the significance of not only this proposal, which was originally mooted and moved by India and South Africa, and now there are 62 co-sponsor countries which have moved a revised draft proposal as well, but also, the status where we stand right now. You understand the intricacies of how things move in the TRIPS Council there at the WTO. So, if you could take us through where do we stand right now, and what's the path ahead for this proposal, because this seems really really important in the global battle against COVID-19.
The first thing which I wanted to mention is that the original proposal of 2nd October 2020 also talked of diagnostic kits, personal protection equipment, medical, equipment like, for instance, oxygen supply and ventilators and the whole gamut of equipment which are used to treat patients. Very importantly, it also included medicines which could act to either ameliorate the conditions of the people already affected, or shorten their hospital stays, or reduce the length of the illness. And finally, vaccines. Now, the US proposal, which President Biden has enunciated, is to give a waiver only for vaccines. So that leaves out the whole gamut of medical diagnostics, PPEs, medical equipment, for instance, like ventilators and medicines, which some of which are undergoing trials. For instance, antiviral, replication medicines, which have been mainly developed in the past few years for cancer treatment, but many of which are now being repurposed to find out if they can act to stop viral replication in COVID as well. And one of the examples is the DRDO medicine, which has got emergency approval. It has been used for anti-cancer treatment, basically. Now it is getting repurposed. So this is the kind of thing which is likely to emerge. And as Dr. Leena Menghaney has mentioned, it is not only important to vaccinate people, of course, that is the top priority, but along with it, to diagnose as to who has COVID, what severity, then to have medicines administered once a person has COVID, and then to shorten the length of the illness and assist recovery. So medicine, diagnostic equipment, and the other things are also important. Now, this proposal of 21st May goes back again and reiterates about all these things. And the US has only mentioned vaccines. The Europeans have said they are willing to look at it without really saying that they will support it. And the basic problem here will be the resistance from big pharmaceutical companies, which are mainly located in the developed countries. And they are fearful that once the doors are opened, they will not only lose out a lot of revenue by way of profits and supernormal profits on vaccines, but on medicines as well. And this present proposal speaks of a waiver for 3 years. The first one spoke of only 1 year. But since this pandemic is not likely to go away in the next few months or even maybe a year, it will have to be a long haul. That is why India, South Africa, and the 60 other countries have suggested 3 years. Of course, under the Marrakesh Agreement of the WTO, there is a provision that every year it will be reviewed, but it will be given for 3 years to start with, and every year it will be reviewed, and at the end of 3 years, the decision will be taken by the WTO whether to extend it further or not. So this is the basic problem that is likely to take place in the negotiations in the WTO. And I may mention that the DG WTO is acutely aware of this, and she has appealed to the G20 leaders, heads of government, that they must direct their ambassadors and tell them that they must engage in right earnest and find out solutions. So first, whether it should be only vaccines or the other things, medicines, diagnostic kits, equipment. Two, what should be the timeline? Whether it should be negotiated within, let's say, the next 1 month, 2 months, because we can't wait forever. And the third thing is about whether it should be for 3 years, 1 year, 2 years, for how long should it be granted by the WTO. So all these things are on the table. They have to be discussed threadbare. And the last point I wanted to mention is that in the WTO, for different agreements, there are these committees. For instance, the TRIPS Council is there for the TRIPS agreement. But all the councils or the committees are represented by, they have members of all the member countries. So the WTO acts as, they have these specialized bodies, but they have representatives of all the countries. So this decision is ultimately going to be taken in the General Council of the WTO, which has the powers of all the committees and the TRIPS Council also inherent in it.
And there has to be a general consensus as well in that meeting, if I'm not wrong.
There is a provision in the Marrakesh Agreement for the establishment of the WTO that voting can be resorted to as at the end, as a last resort, but it has never been resorted to except for 1 or 2 exceptional cases, and there would be huge resistance, especially from the developed countries like the US, if there is a proposal to resort to voting. Because the developing countries being in a majority, the developed countries who hold the intellectual property rights, for instance, are afraid that they will get outvoted on all such issues in future also. So they will prevent voting to take.
But if you have to look at a timeline, Mr. Dasgupta, how do you understand, or if you could make us give us a bit of an idea, because you understand the intricacies of how such proposals work and then go through certain processes. What kind of timeline we might take a look at from here, where the text negotiations are yet to begin, to the decision from the General Council, where, as you're pointing out, a consensus decision is something which is always expected?
It is basically a question of the leaders, and DGWTO has appealed to the right people, the G20. If the European Union, the US, Canada, Australia, Japan, UK, these are the countries which hold the patent rights. And the Russians, for instance. So if they agree to give a waiver to the vaccine, on the vaccine front, and then whether to extend it to medicines and the medical equipment and diagnostic kits, etc. So these things can be sorted out, provided the right directions are given and there is a meeting of minds. And the leaders of the world get together on this huge humanitarian crisis, which is unprecedented in the past century.
Okay, indeed.
Sooner it will be difficult.
Indeed, sooner the better is the best way to go ahead and point it out to all those stakeholders there. Dr. Menghaney, I'd like to bring you back here on 2 aspects, which Dasgupta also mentioned. That is, one is why only going for the TRIPS waiver for vaccine, something which the US proposal, as Mr. Dasgupta is saying, is pointing out, we should rather include all medical products. That's one. And two, that extending the time period from 1 year to 3 years, that's also very, very important, because for all these companies involved, for all the manufacturers involved, 1 year might be too short a period for them to get involved.
Well, in the original, so what India and South Africa and the 62 co-sponsors have essentially done is recognize that access to therapeutics, diagnostics, and other medical technologies is a red line for them. So I think what is very, very clear from the resubmission of the proposal is that they will want to cover therapeutics and other medical technologies, because developing countries are now bearing the proportion of infections and deaths from now on. The pandemic has changed from affecting the wealthy countries to developing countries. And of course, treatments and medical technologies are very important. So this is now going to become a red line, and of course has to be negotiated upon, as Mr. Dasgupta has said. On the timeline, India and South Africa had actually proposed that till herd immunity, till everyone was vaccinated and safe, the original proposal was it would last till then. But for the purposes of negotiation, to give it more shape, they came down to, bringing it down to 3 years. So, of course, it's extendable if the circumstances are continue to be quite dire for the pandemic. So, I'm quite positive that if we sit on the negotiating table, the fact that developing countries have had the major proportion of infections and will have to bear the treatment burden, that they will go ahead and negotiate for all medical technologies. And of course, at a minimum, the proposal is for 3 years. So that's starting. That's the starting that we need to make. And you're right. Manufacturers need that. They need the freedom to operate, to bring in, raise the money that is required to scale up production, to be able not to be fighting litigation with Big Pharma to get the 3-year waiver.
Okay. Fair enough that those two parts are really important. But let's go back to the vaccine aspect there, and let me bring in Dr. Dasgupta again. Dr. Dasgupta, if we have to look at the domestic situation and the way we are looking at the second surge, it hit us really hard, and the importance of vaccination, getting everybody vaccinated, has been, underscored by all the experts, the government agencies as well. In this scenario, how do you think, not only other nations, not only least developed countries, but also, countries like us, wherein the population is too high and we need resources in terms of vaccinating everyone, more vaccines, more number of vaccines. How do you think this TRIPS waiver, once granted by the WTO, will help countries like us specifically?
In our case, we are more fortunate than some of the smaller countries, especially the LDCs and the other poorer countries, because we have the manufacturing capability. But in the case of vaccine, there is a basic difference between production of a vaccine and production of a molecule or a medicine. Because in the case of a medicine, it can be reverse engineered and this biosafety level 3, etc. for producing vaccines is not required. And this fill and finish facility, which is also quite intricate in terms of its engineering, in terms of the safety protocol, that is also not required, strictly speaking. So, and the last point is that a molecule can be developed in a lab without hand-holding by the original patent holder. So, if you do reverse engineering by lifting the IPR rights, giving a waiver, it can be done even without the involvement of the original patent holder. In the case of vaccines, it will not be possible. So the point that I am trying to make is that India is fortunate that we have the manufacturing capability. We are mobilizing, for instance, the Haskin Institute. We are mobilizing some of the other facilities which Bharat Biotech had, for instance, for foot and mouth disease in near Bangalore, rabies near Ankleshwar. They are all being now mobilized to produce Covaxin. And Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech have both been given money by the government by way of advance payment to also ramp up their production facilities.
And Sputnik's manufacturing has also begun from today onwards.
Sputnik V is going to manufacture, which is going to ramp it up to a few crores per month, I think, in a few months' time. Zydus Cadila is waiting in the wings. Novavax, which is also going to be produced by Serum Institute, is getting produced, but subject to emergency authorization. That is also likely to come by about September, October. So there are a host of vaccines which will be available. And the government has calculated that we will have, I think, more than 200 crore doses of vaccines by December, including the 18-19 crore that we have already provided to the people. So in the case of India, really speaking, this TRIPS waiver for vaccines is not really very relevant, except for bringing in vaccine manufacturers like Pfizer and Moderna, which are at the moment, putting some demands on the government, especially Pfizer, from what I have read, in terms of the liability waiver condition. So issuing a compulsory license to Pfizer also could take place if the government thinks so. But on mRNA technology, there is a company in India, Genova, which is also, far advanced in making its mRNA technology vaccine. So as far as India is concerned, the TRIPS waiver for vaccines is not really going to change things very much.
Okay.
It is a question of our investment, our ramping up our production facilities, and then getting our own act in order so that the distribution channels, the remotest areas and the poorest of the people in the rural areas, they have access to vaccines. That is the main challenge in India.
Indeed, and those challenges.
As far as medicines are concerned, it will be of great value to us should the new medicine come up as something which can prevent the spread of the infection in terms of transmissibility, or it can shorten the illness, severity of illness, etc. So it can be of tremendous use for us.
And dealing with some post-COVID effects like the black fungus there as well, because there are various medicines which are required, and there is a shortage there specifically if you're looking at a few cases. Thank you so much, Dr. Jayant Dasgupta, as well as Dr. Leena Menghaney, for your views there. As both our experts were explaining, this is all about a TRIPS waiver on the medical products related to dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, and that includes vaccines and medicines as well. These are all aspects which will have to be dealt with and discussed in detail by the member nations of WTO. But as our experts are pointing out, the sooner it is done, the better it is for everybody around the globe, specifically the least developed countries or the LDCs. Thank you so much once again for watching us. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic. Thank you.